Today, I am going to be covering one of the seminal articles of Magic the Gathering strategy, particularly with an eye towards draft, Ben Stark's article, Drafting the Hard Way. It gets referred to all of the time, and so I figured it might be helpful to players, especially those who haven't read the article, to kind of just see the source material itself. So we're going to be diving through, analyzing it, explaining it, and things of that nature. So let's get started. Ben Stark, one of the great Magic players of all time. He's a Hall of Famer, he's a Pro Tour champion, and he is widely regarded as one of the best drafters of all time, and he loves explaining his thought process whenever he gets the chance. And this is a 2013 article that really redefined the way a lot of people think about Limited. A lot of people ask me for help with booster drafting. I wish so badly it were the kind of thing where I could take 20 minutes of my time to listen to how they draft, tell them what they are doing wrong, and how to fix it. It just isn't. Booster drafting well is incredibly complex. True. The best way I can describe it is that there are two ways, the easy way and the hard way. If you draft the easy way all the time, you can spike when things line up your way, and you are perfectly live to 3-0 and draft good decks when they do. But around half the time, you will not end up with a good deck at all, and will be liable to 0-3 or 1-2 your draft. If you draft the hard way, you can have a good deck in 90% of your drafts. Sound great? What's the problem? Well, the hard way is hard. So this is kind of like the setup, because the easy way, he's going to be talking about it as well, but the easy way is basically like start with a rare, second pick a card, lock into those two colors, and hope for the best. And the hard way is much harder than that. Drafting the hard way means analyzing each new format and being willing to forget about whether you like control or beat down, white or black, forgetting about what was working for you in the last format, and starting to evaluate everything from scratch all over again. Always being willing to drop early picks if you realize something else is open. It means not sticking to the strategy or strategies that you think are best, but weighting the cards that are important for those correctly, and then still being willing to draft completely different decks if that is what's open. In modern day Limited, it's especially interesting because with the rise of 17 lands draft data, people are oftentimes claiming that certain strategies are objectively better than others. And so being willing to draft other things is more relevant today than it has been in the past, even because back in the day, it was hard to definitively say which color was like better than the others or things like that. It requires allowing your decks to go different directions in each draft and not predetermining where you are going to go. Every draft format is different and every draft is different. I don't even like doing our house practice drafts because they bias me into thinking you should go certain directions more than you should, because certain strategies are either open or would work well against what the others in the group are doing. I generally really prefer these days to watch the draft so that I don't get as caught up in trying to win. Instead, I spend more time watching how the commons interact with each other and trying to pick up on how the games and the format plays out. So the more of the mindset of, I'm going to try to learn the most I can rather than individually win each draft. This is also relevant to things like today, where if you're in a format where a certain color is better, you can force yourself down that color a lot of the time. But if you then have a high stakes draft coming up and that color is very clearly not open, you're not going to know how the commons of the other colors interact, what the key cards are, and things like that. So trying to win in the long term versus just trying to win in the short term. So don't get caught up in trying to win is a pretty nice mindset shift. Different things are a little more or a little less important in each new format. So at the start of a new format, I'm mostly trying to identify whether flying is a little better. Some lifelink? Is this a format where drawing cards is a little more profitable than usual? Or is this a format where a lower mana cost is of extra value? So some of these formats, for example, Zendikar is known as the most aggressive format of all time, and so lifelink is a little bit more important. Return to Ravnica, I don't know exactly why flying would be a little bit better, but I think some of the decks there could really gum up the ground pretty well. Modern Masters had some pretty good card draw and things like that. So it's good to know format context. It's always been important to know. But it's oftentimes easy to get stuck in the trap of thinking that this format is just like the last format and evaluating the cards the same way, and that's just not the case. Let's look at a good example of this. I remember when we started our testing for Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, most people thought Seraph of Dawn, which is a 4-mana 2/4 flying lifelink, was better than Mistraven, which is a 4-mana 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, return target creature to its owner's hand. It's not hard to see how this happened. In an aggressive format, the 2/4 would be much better. And in a format where the cheap cards were more powerful, the 2/4 would also be much better. This makes sense because lifelink, as we've established, is better in an aggressive format. And in a format where cheap cards are more powerful, then not only do you need a lifelinker to help you stabilize, but also bouncing the cards to your opponent's hand with a Mistraven is going to be less effective. Avacyn Restored was neither of those things, but the format directly before, Innistrad Dark Ascension, was both. So again, don't get caught up in what's happened before in the previous format or even a couple formats ago. Sometimes cards are going to perform drastically differently, even if they're the exact same card within different format contexts. And if just because the set before was aggressive or heavy on bombs or things like that doesn't mean this current format is going to be. It was a format where the cheap cards, like Werewolves and Travel Preparations, hit hard and prevented late games, or were still good in the late game. In that format, the 2/4 would have been better than Mistraven. In Avacyn, however, the cheap cards were horrible. Games were mostly decided by individual powerful cards. The tempo swing from being able to bounce a Soul Bond that was preventing you from attacking, or bouncing their powerful 5-mana card that they were dependent on to swing the game was extremely valuable. Now, these individual mechanics don't necessarily matter. I will note that Soul Bond is one that like kind of creatures kind of like pair up and get more powerful when they're both in play, things like that. And there are some like these are just kind of examples that are more relevant if you know the individual cards from Avacyn Restored. But you can all kind of relate to the idea of formats where it's more dependent on having a big threat stick in play than having a bunch of little aggro creatures coming at you. The 2-life a turn that makes it almost impossible to race the 2/4 was not particularly amazing, since you weren't usually racing. The 2/4 is still a good card and one that could help you win games, but it was not the bomb it would have been in formats like Innistrad Dark Ascension, Zendikar, or Gatecrash. So, formats are different. The single thing that people do that ruins most drafts is stick to their early picks. In the vast majority of draft formats, you should be trying to figure out what is underdrafted at the table so that you can have access to a lot of what you are looking for in packs 2 and 3. Also, by identifying which colors or archetypes the people to your right aren't playing, you end up having several packs to get incredibly powerful picks from. If you stick to your first picks, you often end up with a few packs to select first pick quality cards from. So, if you're in the open colors, they're not going to be interested in, say, green cards, and so you can get green cards incredibly late in the draft. And that's just something that if you aren't reading signals, you're not going to benefit from as much at all. Because if you just lock in, say you first pick a blue card, second pick a white card, and lock into blue-white, if green is open, you're not going to benefit from that at all. If the guy next to you is playing blue and you've just stuck to blue because you first picked a blue card, you're going to get incredibly cut. You're just getting the second best blue card out of every pack. And having access to the second best card out of every pack in a draft is not a recipe for success. Even in today's world, which is pretty different from the 2013 draft environment, in today's world, there are many more playable cards than there were in 2013. The fall off was much steeper, so you could end up with a really, really non-functional deck. In today's world, there's oftentimes going to be enough playables that you will actually have a deck that can do things. They've made a conscious push to do this because they don't want you just like not being able to play, but you're still going to get decimated by someone that actually has quality cards. So yeah, this is really one of pretty much the biggest takeaway from this article. A lot of the time when people say drafting the hard way, they're using that as a shorthand for don't stick to your early picks, read signals, essentially. This first half of the article is incredibly important. This whole don't stick to the assumptions you had from previous formats, but this don't get locked into your first few picks is oftentimes what people associate with this article. But yes, people often think that they can just jam what they want because if they are cutting something off, then they will have access to the cards they want in pack 2, even if not in pack 3. This only works when pack 2 is specifically more valuable than pack 3. Even if you draft mono white from pick 1, there were probably a few other white cards in the packs, and if the guy to your left or his left is drafting in easy mode, 95% of people are, and he opened or got past a white card from the person passing to him, if it's the guy 2 seats down, then they are probably still going to draft white despite you not passing them any great cards in that color. This is the key paragraph here. Again, you can't really predict what the people around you are going to do, especially the people to your left, where you have basically no information on them in the early parts of the draft. Before pack 2, you don't know what the person to your left is doing, so gambling on the person to your left not being the colors that you want them not to be is going to be really difficult. If I open an insane white bomb rare that I'm going to play no matter what, it doesn't matter if you're not passing me any white cards. I'm still going to try to play that bomb rare in certain situations. A lot of the time. Maybe I'm also going to be trying to rely on pack 2 to get me all the white cards. And then you're just getting wrecked both times because the person passing to you is not playing white in pack 1. Is not passing white in pack 1. And then I'm not going to pass you white in pack 2. So you're never going to get any of the white cards that you want. Because you never know what the person next to you opened. And that can drastically shift the draft. They also might prioritize cards different from you. Which means that if I'm passing you a card that I think is bad, the person you're passing to might not think that. They might think the card is great. And so they're like, wow, I just got this great card. White is clearly open. And then they move into white and they screw you in pack 2. And that's just how it can go sometimes. And then finally, the person you're passing to might just be bad. As he said, 95% of the people are on easy mode, and they're just like, okay, I second picked a white card, and I'll move into white or whatever. So yeah, that's just key to the whole like thing. You can't really predict the guy to your left, but if you're reading signals from the guy to your right, you can kind of do well in pack 3. On the other hand, if you get a first pick quality white card, pick 4, and a 2 to 4th pick quality blue card, pick 8. While nothing is guaranteed, you can bet your the vast majority of the time that the people to your right aren't drafting white, and blue is heavily underdrafted at the table. The exception of this rule are formats where pack 2 is disproportionately greater importance to you than pack 3. This is referring to formats where each pack was from a different set, and those sets sometimes had different power levels. That's not the case in modern day limited, where all of the packs come from the same set, though this was always an interesting strategy consideration. A perfect example of this is DGR. If you start out in a Gatecrash guild, since you don't care much about pack 3 and pack 2 is your entire world. If your first 2 picks put you into a specific Gatecrash guild, you can just jam that guild and not bother to read. So this DGR, I believe, is Dragon's Maze, Gatecrash, and Return to Ravnica. I believe that's what that stands for, and those are 3 different sets. So if you start out in a Gatecrash guild, when you're starting off with a, I don't remember the exact order they were drafted in, but Gatecrash is in the middle. If you start off in a Gatecrash guild, then pack 2 is your entire world. So because that's the pack that are going to have the gold cards supporting your Gatecrash guild. Since you don't care much about pack 3 and pack 2 is your entire world, if your first 2 picks put you into a specific Gatecrash guild, you can just jam that guild and not bother to read what the people passing to you are playing or what is being underdrafted in the pod, since you basically live and die by only pack 2 and you are only looking for strong cards out of the first few picks of pack 2. Draft formats where this is correct, like DGR, are few and far between though. The next thing that often ruins drafts is trying to draft the nuts or the best deck. This is, again, especially big these days with people just being like, oh man, I really like this deck because this is the best deck according to 17 lands draft data, or the best deck that limited resources told me to draft, or things like that. And people can really sabotage themselves trying to draft the best deck. Going for a combo or cards without synergy that don't fit their deck's plan or difficult to cast but have a high power level. So this is like kind of an extension of trying to draft the best deck. It's like, oh, I opened this card that needs a lot of work to build around. I'm going to go for that. Or you're just like, okay, I know that my deck needs a 2-drop right now, but I'm just going to keep going for power level here, even though I need 2-drops or things like that. I have 3-0'd so many draft pods with very mediocre looking decks. You don't need to be in the best color or archetype. You don't need a way to win. You don't even need particularly powerful cards to win. If your deck is fully functional, meaning the cards you do have work together, your curve is good for the format, and your mana allows you to cast your spells when you need to cast them. Some formats you are under more pressure, some you have a little more time. Rise of the Eldrazi known for being like the slowest format of all time. That is good enough, or one of the slowest. I think M15 was really slow as well. One of the M's. That is good enough to allow you to 3-0 any pod. Sure, you won't have the best deck in the pod, but that's not how Magic works. This is so true. You can do well with any functional deck just because even if your deck isn't the best, you can just get slightly luckier than your opponents in the games when they do have a better deck than you. It's very likely that if you draft this way, you're going to end up with a solid deck. And if your solid deck goes up against another solid deck, then you are going to be roughly 50% to win the game if you're equal skill level. And oftentimes you are probably going to be better than your opponent because you're drafting with this high level strategy that you know how to employ, and maybe they don't. That's not necessarily true, but let's just say you're roughly equal. You're 50% to win those games. Even the games where your opponent has a better deck than you, you're still like 45% to win those games because they can just get mana screwed in one of the 3 games, or they can just draw badly and you can just have your cards line up well. It's like the swings are not that steep. The most common scenario is not that you have the 3rd best deck and you play against the best or 2nd best deck, you lose. Otherwise, you win. In that case, drafting the 2nd to 3rd best deck in the pod every time would result in a 2-1 every time. In reality, when you have the 3rd best deck and you play against the best deck in the pod, you are usually just a small underdog because your deck is very good anyways. In general, I feel outmatched when I play my 2-0 match in my draft pods. But assuming roughly even play skill, I win that match around 45% of the time because I have a good, fully functional deck. If he stumbles, gets flooded, or my cards just happen to line up well against his, I can very easily win. When you have good, fully functional draft decks, it is very easy to beat a better deck. Very true, very, very true. When you have train wrecks / bad draft decks, it is very difficult to beat anyone. It's huge, especially when you're playing at a Pro Tour level event like Ben Stark has often done throughout his career. You need to make sure that you're not like completely ruining your chance of doing well in the whole tournament by train wrecking a draft. Because if you go 3-0 in a draft, sure, it can set you up. But if you could just go 2-1 in every draft you do at a Pro Tour, then you're giving yourself a ton of consistency that you need to potentially do well in these tournaments. Because Magic tournaments are incredibly high variance. And the way you do well in the long term is by just consistently applying a strategy that is going to give you a good chance to win most of the time. It's not by trying to high roll everything, because if you high roll everything like a roulette table, you're going to coin flip a lot of your matches and potentially win a couple and then just like lose a bunch in a row, and you're going to tank your chance at the tournament. And you need to have a consistent strategy for winning. And so this is why in this perspective, you want to give yourself a chance to 2-1 all of the pods with like upside to 3-0 versus, okay, I'm either going to 3-0 or 0-3, because in the long run, 2-1 over the long run is going to give you a better record, and then sometimes you'll spike in 3-0. But it's much less likely that you're just going to be completely curb stomped and go 0-3. This thing of when you have train wrecks, it's very difficult to beat anyone. That's just incredibly true. There's some decks where you're just playing against them and you're like, wow, this deck just has no good cards. There's nothing I'm worried about from them. And my cards are just like straight. I have better card quality, better synergy, and it's just very hard for your opponents to do anything because even if you have a bad curve or something like that, their cards are just very weak. And you just want to avoid the chances of that happening. And the way you do that is by figuring out the open colors and not getting completely hosed or not trying to force yourself down a lane that's not open. A good example of this approach would be my first draft in Pro Tour Gatecrash. It was covered in the Draft Viewer, so you can go back and check it out. So Draft Viewer is a thing from the Pro Tours where they would like show you all the picks that someone made. I started out with some Orzhov stuff, the guild I consider the best by miles in Triple Gatecrash, but I wasn't seeing Orzhov, so around pick 5, pack 1, I realized Simic was open and completely jumped ship. I was very fortunate to have this opportunity. I had it because a lot of other players in the draft were unwilling to draft Simic because they thought it was the worst of the 5 guilds. Personally, I think it was the 4th or the 5th, and not particularly good, but that Dimir was the worst. So, this imbalance allowed good Simic cards to come late, telling me that Simic was wide open, and I jumped ship, drafted a mediocre Simic deck, and went 2-1. So, this is the classic where he was playing black-white, which is Orzhov. Everyone at this time would probably have known this because these sets were very recent at that time, and I mean, Ravnica has come back since then, but just so you know, Orzhov is black-white, Simic is blue-green, so there's no overlap whatsoever. And so he was like 5 picks into his draft playing black-white, and then he realized Simic was open, switched into Simic, and ended up going 2-1 because nobody else wanted to draft it. And he could tell that nobody else wanted to draft it because he was seeing good Simic cards pick 5. And that's the sort of switch that you can make when you are reading the signals and not locking into your colors. And a lot of players, even if they aren't locking into their colors by pack 1, like pick 2 or pick 3, a lot of players aren't willing to jump ship 5 picks into the pack. And that's just the sort of thing that as you get more advanced and more skilled, you become more proficient at doing. If I had stuck to Orzhov, my deck would have been absolutely terrible. And while I have no idea what my record would have been, my EV in wins in the draft would have been much lower. I obviously was very unhappy to have to move from the best guild in the format to the 4th, best guild out of 5. But you don't want to dictate what you draft. You want to draft what you see and what is being underrated. Any fully functional, reasonable draft deck can 2-1 or 3-0 a pod. Trainwrecks struggle to get a win. Again, he reiterates this point. It took many years of endless drafting for me to improve my draft game, and I've spent many years trying to slowly improve the drafting skill of many of my closest friends. If you are willing to play the game in hard mode, don't expect to be good at it quickly or to immediately start crushing. However, if you are willing to read every draft, be open to drafting whatever archetype is available that draft, and even drop bomb rare first picks, you can put together a good draft deck in almost every draft you do, and you can be a highly successful booster drafter. Will you accept this challenge? The choice is yours. And yeah, that is the seminal article, Drafting the Hard Way by Ben Stark. I hope that you learned something here. Give a lot of credit to Ben Stark because obviously he wrote the article, and I'm just going through it and trying to contextualize it for modern day limited for you. But anyway, that is going to do it for this video. If you made it all the way till the end of the video, leave hashtag choosing the hard way because hopefully we're all going to be drafting the hard way a little bit more after learning about this. And as he said, the choice is yours. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.